I woke up to the sound of my own ventilator being unplugged, and the first words I heard were, "Just sign it, he won't even know." The room smelled like jasmine and betrayal. I couldn't move yet, but my mind was fully awake. I had been aware for 2 months, trapped in a paralyzed body while the world around me revealed its ugliest truths. My fiancée, Janet, sat beside my bed like she had for the last 4 years, but not for love. Not anymore. She wasn't holding my hand today. She was handing over a contract. To Frank. "I'll take care of the press," Frank whispered. "The narrative is in place. You've been caring for your fiancé faithfully while he withers. The public loves a grieving goddess." He chuckled under his breath. Janet smiled. That fake, rehearsed, gentle smile she always reserved for cameras. "Perfect. I've already sold 80% of his equity. No one can stop the acquisition now." I blinked slowly. It was the only thing I could control. But they didn't notice. They never bothered to look closely anymore. I had founded Aurelian Labs with nothing but student debt and a vision. It became a billion-dollar biotech firm. Then came the accident. A drunk driver. For years in a coma. And while I lay dying in a hospital bed, Janet drained my accounts, sold my home, even pawned the watch my father gave me before he passed. She didn't know I had embedded an emergency trigger into the bylaws of the company, one that could only be activated by me. And the moment I signed that hospital discharge form with trembling fingers, everything she thought she owned would revert. I wasn't just coming back to life. I was coming back to bury her dream. Janet had spent 4 years building her empire on my name. I was about to buy it out from under her feet, and fire her in front of the world. My name is Andrew Lockhart, 34. Founder of Aurelian Labs. Medical tech innovator. Once named in Forbes 30 under 30 before a car crash sent me into a coma. That was 4 years ago. Before the world forgot me, I had everything. A company that bore my DNA, investors who called me a genius, and a fiancée who used to trace constellations on my chest with her finger while telling me how we were going to grow old in a villa somewhere in the Greek Isles. That was Janet. Janet Liu. A marketing graduate with a jawline that could cut glass and eyes that never blinked in front of a camera. When I met her, she was organizing a charity gala I almost skipped. I was on the cover of a medical journal that month. She introduced herself by handing me a copy, not asking for a signature, but circling a paragraph she disagreed with and telling me to read it later. That was her hook. Smart. Bold. Unafraid of success. We weren't just in love. We were strategic partners. Janet curated my public image. Styled my suits. Spoke to reporters when I didn't want to. She was the one who helped me turn clinical jargon into digestible investor pitches. Her smile closed more series of funding rounds than any pitch deck I ever built. I trusted her. Completely. I let her into every corner of my world. And she let Frank into my house the same month I slipped into a coma. Frank Delgado. My former college roommate. He studied finance while I built medtech prototypes. I brought him on as CFO when Aurelian crossed $10 million in annual revenue. He wasn't brilliant, but he was loyal, or so I thought. When my parents died in a plane crash during my second year of undergrad, Frank flew across the country just to bring me a pair of clean shoes before the funeral. He had no family of his own, so I made him mine. Until he decided mine was up for grabs. When the accident happened, I was told my survival was unlikely. Multiple fractures, internal bleeding, neural damage. I had signed a power of attorney for medical decisions over to Janet just weeks before. She was devastated, they said. Wailed at my bedside. Refused to leave the hospital for days. The truth? She started liquidating assets by week 3. She held my hand with one glove while her other hand moved funds from my dormant accounts into a holding company she registered under the name JLF Holdings. Janet Liu and Frank. They visited me every week, posed for photos beside my unconscious body, smiling for pity clicks. Frank started attending startup mixers as interim executor of Aurelian. Janet launched her skincare line, JX Glow, which she told the press was funded by silent backers. I had been dead to her for months. But my body refused to die. And the system I built with Mariana's help didn't die either. Mariana Vega. My head of legal. My firewall. She had warned me once, years ago, after she reviewed a few of Janet's side contracts, that some of the clauses Janet was sneaking into our joint holdings seemed heavily tilted. I ignored her. Told her Janet was just being cautious. That I would marry her soon. Mariana never brought it up again. But after my accident, she stayed. Even after Janet forced the board to vote her out, Mariana continued to dig quietly. My biometric shareholder override, something we coded into Aurelian security stack as a last resort, remained dormant. Waiting. Watching. I don't remember much of the first 2 years. But in the 3rd year of my coma, something changed. I started dreaming. Then hearing. Then feeling. And soon, I could think again. I knew I was trapped. Couldn't move, couldn't speak. But I could hear Janet talking to Frank about asset transfers. Could feel when she removed my ring to take photos with a new product line. Could smell Frank's cologne during late-night visits when he thought no one was watching. By month 47, I could blink. And I did. Alone. Repeatedly. Until the nurse caught it. It took 6 months of therapy and nerve reactivation to get to the point where I could stand. They all thought I was grateful to be alive. I let them believe it. Janet cried when I walked again. Said it was a miracle. Called the press. Said she never gave up hope. I smiled for every photo. Thanked her on record. The press called her a saint. But saints don't transfer real estate deeds under a dying man's name. Saints don't fake invoices to disguise stolen funds. Saints don't sleep with their comatose fiancé's CFO. I spent 2 weeks reviewing every document Mariana had compiled. Every shell company. Every legal loophole they'd exploited. Mariana handed me a list of assets and liabilities, but I didn't look at the debt. I stared at one name on the page, JX Glow. It was Janet's pride. Built with stolen money. Run by Frank. Backed by a board who thought I was brain dead. They didn't know I had already acquired 51% of it last month using a shadow firm managed by Mariana. Janet always dreamed of opening her flagship store in Tokyo. She'd never guessed that on opening day, the doors would be locked. By me. 2 weeks after my miraculous recovery, Janet arranged a candlelit dinner in the hospital's VIP suite. Soft jazz played through her phone, and she'd hired a chef to bring in lobster thermidor and champagne, though I couldn't eat anything yet beyond puree and pills. She wore the same dress she'd worn the night I proposed, sleek, deep red, backless, with a faint rose scent clinging to it. She held my hand and whispered, "We have so much to catch up on. I missed you every day." She said it like she believed it. Like she hadn't stripped my legacy down to parts and sold it off while I was unconscious. Like she didn't meet Frank in my home office 3 times a week while the machines beside me beeped out a steady goodbye. I let her talk. I nodded. I even smiled. But inside, I wasn't listening to her voice, I was listening to my pulse. Slow. Measured. Grounded. I needed it steady for what came next. Janet wanted a wedding. Soon. A splashy one. She said she'd waited too long to be the fiancé of a ghost. I asked her why she hadn't pushed the board to keep Mariana when I was in recovery. She hesitated. Then lied. She wanted to leave. She couldn't handle the pressure. She said you fired her. She's bitter. Janet laughed. People always resent women who succeed without their help. I looked at her hand, resting lightly on mine. No tremble. No remorse. Just polish. That night, I told Mariana to initiate phase 2. We were going to take back everything. But it had to be clean. Legal. Public. Because Janet's betrayal wasn't just financial. It was personal. The day after, Frank arrived at my hospital room unannounced, carrying a bouquet of yellow orchids and that salesman's grin he always wore. "You're a hard man to kill," he said, half joking. I didn't respond. Just stared at the flowers. "Those were my mother's favorite." He faltered. "Really? No. I just wanted to see if you still had the ability to look guilty." He sat down slowly. "Look, I know things got messy. But Janet, she really thought you were gone, man. And you wouldn't believe the pressure. The shareholders, the board, things needed handling. And she handled them in bed?" He froze. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't move. I just watched the blood leave his face. "You signed off on the liquidation of my equity," I said. "You leveraged the trust one gave you to set up a fund that diverted millions." Frank tried to argue it was more complicated. That it was, for continuity. That Janet was losing it and he stepped in to help. But I didn't flinch. "You emptied the hospital fund I created for spinal rehab trials," I said. "Do you know how many patients never got enrolled because of you?" Silence. He stood to leave. "Andrew, if you want to sue me, you can. But Janet, she's already on edge. She thinks you're going to do something." "I already did." He turned. I gestured to the bouquet. "Check the card." Inside, it read, "You're formally terminated from Aurelian." Legal delivery pending. AL. Janet didn't confront me until 2 days later. You're being vindictive, she said, tears forming, perfectly. I kept everything together. I protected your name. I made sure you weren't forgotten. You posted a brand partnership ad on my birthday, Janet. That was scheduled. You tagged yourself, not me. You called me your inspiration while siphoning off every asset I built. You sold my patents to third parties. You rebranded my life as if I'd died. She started to cry harder. You don't know what it was like. Everyone said you were brain dead. They told me to let you go. I waited 4 years. No, I said coldly. You waited for your name to replace mine on every contract. That's not grief. That's ambition. For the first time, she didn't have a comeback. Janet looked at me like I was a stranger. Maybe I was. The man she betrayed had died. The one sitting across from her now? He had no love left to give her. No warmth. Only clarity. And a very specific plan. She still didn't know I was the one who had acquired 51% of JX Glow through a silent auction. She didn't know the company board was no longer hers. That her name was being scrubbed from the legal filings as we spoke. Janet had built her kingdom on a grave she assumed would stay filled. But I had crawled out of it. And now I was going to bury her career in mine. I used to believe the worst thing that could happen to a man was death. I was wrong. It's knowing the people you would have died for stood over your body and chose profit over prayer. The nights after Frank's visit, I didn't sleep. I'd close my eyes and see Janet leaning over me in the hospital bed, brushing my hair with careful fingers while whispering lies into my silent ears. I'll always protect what's yours, baby. Every word now echoed like acid in my head. I felt something worse than rage. It was grief with no funeral. You can't mourn someone who's alive, but I did. I mourned the woman I thought she was. The Janet who used to put notes in my lab coat. The one who made me tea when I pulled 3-day coding sessions. The one who cried the day I told her about my brother's death. I mourned a ghost. She never existed. And that realization didn't come with screams or breakdowns. It came with silence. Heavy, suffocating silence that followed me everywhere, even when I walked the hospital corridor at night, holding onto the railing with trembling hands, pretending I was healing. In truth, I was unraveling. Every step forward physically was matched by a step backward emotionally. I'd sit alone in my hospital room for hours, watching the city skyline through the glass window. Wondering, was it all fake? Or did she change over time? Was I blind, or was I just too trusting? And then there was the guilt. I brought Frank into my company. I gave Janet access to everything, my passwords, my finances, my future. I treated them like family, and in return, they gutted me. I wasn't angry at them. I was angry at myself. I let them do this. Every time Mariana came by with legal updates, I nodded and signed, but my chest ached. She could sense it too. She never pushed. Just left me files and tea, then sat quietly nearby, like she knew I couldn't stand the weight of talking. One night, I asked her softly, "Why didn't you walk away?" She didn't look up from her tablet. "Because I knew you'd come back." I almost cried. I didn't. I just clenched my fist beneath the blanket and whispered, "I'm not the same man." "I know," she said. "And that's why you're more dangerous now." That terrified me more than anything. Because she was right. There were moments I couldn't recognize myself. I wasn't just trying to reclaim what I lost, I wanted them to hurt. I imagined Janet watching her flagship store close down mid-launch. I imagined Frank being escorted out by security in front of reporters. And in those visions, I didn't flinch. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt nothing. And that scared me more than the betrayal. Because when revenge starts to feel like justice, you forget where one ends and the other begins. There was a part of me that wanted to let it all burn. Let the lawsuits destroy them. Let Mariana erase every trace of Janet's career. Let Frank rot in a legal maze of countersuits and bad PR. But then what? What would I become? I started writing again. Not code, journals. Pages of thoughts that made no sense to anyone but me. Some were angry. Some were broken. One entry read, "She didn't kill me. But she buried the part that could have loved her again." And it was true. Even when Janet showed up one evening with tears and trembling lips, begging to just talk, I didn't move. She said, "Andrew, we can fix this." I was scared. I made mistakes. But you're here now. That's what matters. I looked at her like I was studying a stranger through a glass wall. "You stole my life," I whispered. "And you sold it back to me in pieces." Her lips trembled. "Please, don't do this." But I already had. The paperwork was signed. JX Glow was no longer hers. Frank had already been terminated. The media blitz was scheduled. The flagship store was hours away from being locked. And the man she once called her miracle? He had become her reckoning. But none of it felt like a win. It felt like standing in the ruins of a house I built, only to realize I was the one who handed over the matchbook. And somewhere in the background, I knew Mariana was watching. Not with judgment. Not even with sympathy. But with that quiet awareness of someone who had lived through fire before. I didn't ask for comfort. And she didn't offer any. Because this wasn't about comfort anymore. This was about reckoning. And I didn't know if I would survive who I was becoming by the end of it. 3 days before the official takeover of JX Glow, Mariana burst into my hospital room. No knock. No clipboard. No comm. "They're trying to file an injunction against your ownership," she said. I was in the middle of physio, my legs trembling under the strain of movement. I barely had enough energy to walk 6 steps, but those words shot adrenaline through my veins like fire. "What?" I breathed. She tossed a folder onto the bed. "Janet and Frank, using a third-party proxy, claim your biometric verification was coerced. That you were mentally unfit when you signed the acquisition transfer." I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because of how desperate it was. "They're saying I'm still brain damaged?" She didn't laugh. "No. They're saying you're unstable." There it was. Not just betrayal. Now they were trying to paint me as a threat to my own company's future. Frank had once called me a genius. Now he was calling me dangerous. But the part that made my pulse stop wasn't the lawsuit. It was the name on the documents Mariana handed me. Mariana Vega. They listed her as the one who manipulated me. "They're saying you pressured me into triggering the override," I said, barely above a whisper. She nodded. "They're coming after me, Andrew." It hit me like a fist to the gut. They weren't just going to smear my name, they were going to burn the only person who'd stayed. The only person who chose loyalty over profit. Janet wasn't just playing defense anymore. She was going nuclear. I closed the folder slowly. What happens if this sticks? They'll freeze the acquisition. Delay the store closure. Drag everything through court for months. Maybe years. Can they win? She hesitated. "That depends on you." And I knew what she meant. I had kept quiet all this time, let the plan unfold in shadows. But if I wanted to save Mariana, I would have to come into the light. Show my recovery. Testify. Speak. Let the world see I wasn't a ghost anymore. But that also meant risking everything. My image. My recovery. My control. It meant war. The next morning, I released a statement. A short one. No PR fluff. No legalese. I was aware. I was conscious. I watched the people closest to me sell off pieces of my life as if I were already dead. But I survived. And now I'm taking back everything they stole, without apology. It went viral in hours. Suddenly, I was no longer the comatose genius. I was the man betrayed and awakened. Frank posted a video the same night, feigning hurt. Said he'd always seen Andrew as a brother. That greedy advisors were misleading me now. That unfortunate misunderstandings had occurred. And Janet? She vanished from public view. But her lawyers didn't. They filed a motion that same week to strip Mariana of her license. They weren't just trying to kill my comeback. They were going for blood. And the war that began as whispers in a hospital room had just exploded into a full-blown corporate firestorm. And this time, they'd pushed too far. Because they hadn't just come for me anymore. They came for someone I still had the strength to protect. The night before the flagship store was set to open in Tokyo, I flew in under a false name. Mariana warned me it wasn't safe. That Janet's legal team was working overtime to reverse the takeover. That paparazzi might swarm if they caught wind I was even in the country. I told her I didn't care. This wasn't about safety anymore. It was about standing face to face with what was left of the life I built. We stayed in a private suite overlooking the Shibuya district. Neon lights painted the windows, and for a second, I felt the ghost of who I used to be, the ambitious founder who once walked into investor rooms with nothing but blueprints and fire in his chest. That version of me died 4 years ago. But tonight, he was going to bury the people who killed him. The press conference was scheduled for 9 a.m. JGlow's launch had been teased for months. Janet would be there. Of course, she would. She lived for the flash of cameras. But what she didn't know was that the board had shifted. All her stakeholders? Bought out. Her name? Legally revoked. And by the time she walked into that building, every glossy panel and luxury fixture would belong to me. Not just the company. The building. The lease. The patents. The supply chain. Every molecule of her fake empire. Mariana and I arrived at 7:30. We entered through the executive access elevator, no signage, no ceremony. Just silence and glass and cold air. When the doors opened to the showroom floor, it was exactly as I expected. Janet was already there. Dressed in a muted beige power suit, flawless as ever, speaking to the camera crew, controlling the narrative like she always did. Until she turned and saw me. For a second, her smile held. A flash of disbelief. Like her mind couldn't process what her eyes were telling her. Then it dropped. "Andrew," she whispered, too stunned to hide it. I walked toward her, slowly, each step deliberate. My legs still ached, but I wanted her to see, really see, what it looked like when a man crawled out of his grave and learned how to walk just to end her career. Her voice rose, shrill behind the facade. "You can't be here. This is a private launch." "No," I said calmly. "This is my building." She blinked, confused. "I own it now. Bought it last week under Aurelian International. It's one of our new shell subsidiaries. Effective this morning, the lease was revoked." "That's not possible," she spat. "The paperwork. Filed. Stamped. Executed." I handed her the folder Mariana had given me. She opened it with trembling fingers, scanning line after line. Her eyes widened. She looked up. "You set me up." "No, Janet. You set yourself up. I just walked you into the ending you earned." The film crew stood frozen behind her. Mariana nodded to the manager beside her, who dimmed the lights and shut off the feed. I wasn't done. "You see this?" I gestured to the glowing JX Glow sign behind us. "That's not your brand anymore. That's a product line under Aurelian now. A failed one. You can't shut me out of my own company," she screamed. "I didn't shut you out," I said. "You walked out the moment you drained my accounts and called it grief." Frank chose that moment to enter from the side hallway. Of course. Coward couldn't miss the show. His eyes landed on me and immediately darted to the floor. "Frank," I said without turning. "You're still out of work, right?" "Andrew. Because your fraud case begins next week. Mariana just served you papers in LA. You might want to check your mail." I was following her lead, he said, voice breaking. I turned to him fully. "You followed her into my bank accounts. You followed her into my bed. The least you could do is follow her out the damn door." Janet grabbed my wrist suddenly, eyes desperate. "We can fix this. Andrew, you're angry. I get it. But I loved you. You know I did." I stared at her. For years of silence. For years of stolen money, of fake tears, of selling my life in pieces. And now she wanted to call it love? I pulled my hand away. "You loved what I gave you. The name. The access. The fortune. But when I couldn't speak, you chose the only voice left in the room, your own. Please. No more lies, Janet. You were betting I wouldn't wake up. That if I did, I'd be too broken to fight back." "You were broken," she hissed. "You could barely blink. And I kept everything going. You think I wanted to do this? I built a life for you." "No," I said coldly. "You built a life on top of mine. Now it's collapsing." I stepped back, nodding to Mariana. Security entered. Quietly. Professionally. "Escort them out." Janet screamed. Frank tried to argue. But it didn't matter. The moment the doors closed behind them, the silence returned. I stood there, breathing. Mariana stepped beside me. "You okay?" she asked. "No," I whispered. "But I'm clean." She looked at me carefully. "You don't have to go back to the company right away." "I'm not," I said. "Not yet." "You're walking away?" I shook my head. "No. I'm just walking forward." We stood in front of the JX Glow sign, still glowing faintly. Mariana looked at it and then at me. "Want me to shut that down?" I nodded. She flipped the switch. The lights died instantly. And with it, so did the last illusion Janet ever sold. And in the silence, for the first time in 4 years, I finally exhaled. The next few weeks passed like waves, crashing in silence, pulling me deeper into the truth of what had happened. But for the first time in 4 years, I wasn't drowning. I wasn't gasping for air beneath someone else's story. I was writing my own again. Frank's fraud trial began exactly 9 days after the Tokyo takedown. The media had a field day. The former co-CEO of Aurelian Technologies and acting proxy of JX Glow caught laundering charitable funds while his former partner lay unconscious in a hospital bed? It practically wrote itself. He pled not guilty. Of course. But Mariana had evidence they couldn't scrub: emails, recordings, asset transfers done through burner accounts tied to his assistant's laptop. And when the pressure turned up, his own assistant flipped. Frank didn't walk into court with a briefcase. He walked in with a suitcase. He knew he wasn't coming back. He got 6 years. No parole for 3. Janet didn't show up to the trial. She was too busy trying to salvage what was left of her influencer empire, what hadn't been dissolved, delisted, or publicly disavowed. I watched from a distance as she posted healing retreat photos from Thailand. As if yoga and waterfall selfies could wash away betrayal. But her follower count dipped every day. Her sponsors dropped one by one. Even her publicist resigned. And then I dropped the final blow. A 90-minute keynote address titled, "What They Did While I Slept." It wasn't rage-filled. It wasn't scandalous. It was quiet. Calm. Devastating. I showed hospital footage. Boardroom charts. Donation records gutted. A graph of my neural activity the moment I heard Janet's voice telling doctors to, "Just let me go." I ended with one sentence. Love isn't proven when someone's watching. It's proven when they're not. The internet broke. Articles flooded in. #AwakeAndrew trended worldwide. TikToks dissected every moment. People made side-by-side comparisons of Janet's posts during my coma with the timeline I revealed. She tried to clap back. Tried to claim emotional breakdown, being misled by advisors, living in grief. But it was too late. Because grief doesn't forge signatures. Grief doesn't lease luxury cars with embezzled cash. Grief doesn't sleep in another man's bed 6 months into her fiancé's coma and change his company tagline to "Reimagine the future without him." I didn't reply. Silence was louder than any defense. Meanwhile, Mariana quietly filed to reopen the spinal rehab trial program we'd once designed together. She didn't ask for attention. She just did the work. One evening, I dropped by the clinic unannounced. She was in scrubs, sleeves rolled up, gently helping a boy with tremors stand for the first time. She didn't notice me right away. But when she did, she smiled, soft, tired, real. "I didn't think you'd come," she said. "I didn't know I would." She offered me tea like nothing had changed. Like we weren't survivors of a storm that nearly broke us both. "I can't rebuild everything," I told her. "You don't have to," she said. "You just have to decide what's worth building next." I looked around the room. At the patients. The soft hum of machines we once dreamed of creating. Maybe it wasn't about revenge anymore. Maybe it never was. Maybe it was about reminding the world, and myself, who I'd been before the silence. Before the betrayal. Before love became leverage. But I wasn't naive anymore. I sent one last message that night. A press statement. Short. No bitterness. Closure isn't about punishing the ones who hurt you. It's about choosing who gets to walk into your future, and who only belongs to your past. Frank was gone. Janet was irrelevant. And I wasn't just awake. I was alive. Months later, I stood at the launch of our new nonprofit, Aurora Rising. A foundation dedicated to funding experimental neuro-rehab programs for underprivileged families. I didn't speak much. Mariana did most of the talking. But at the end, the host asked me one thing. "If you could go back," she said, "would you still have loved Janet?" I looked at the camera. Paused. And then answered with the truth. Yes. Because even false love teaches us the cost of real loyalty. The audience went quiet. Not out of discomfort, out of understanding. Because they knew. The man who'd survived 4 years of silence, betrayal, and erasure didn't just wake up. He rose. He reclaimed. He rebuilt. And he left them all behind. Ending, and the first real breath I took after that coma, wasn't for her. It was for me.